5 años con la organización de esta capacitación para profesores de inglés de la región Cajamarca, y ahora nos da mucha alegría y satisfacción ver que tenemos profesores de diferentes partes del Perú, ¿no? De Lima, de Chiclayo, de Cerro de Pasco, y la verdad nos hace sentir muy orgullosos del trabajo que venimos realizando. Al asumir la dirección de este Centro de Idiomas, tuve 2 metas muy importantes. Una de ellas fue la capacitación a todos nuestros docentes para elevar y recuperar el prestigio del Centro de Idiomas, y la proyección a la comunidad a través de estos seminarios de capacitación a los docentes, a los profesores de inglés de las diferentes instituciones educativas de la región Cajamarca. Nos vamos a ir porque ya todo inicio tiene un final, pero nos iremos dejando un camino muy bien trazado y esperamos que sea superado a todo nivel. El Centro de Idiomas se dedica a la enseñanza de idiomas extranjeros, ¿no? Como inglés, francés, alemán, portugués, así también como nuestros propios idiomas, como es la enseñanza del idioma quechua. Son 37 años ya que viene funcionando a través de toda su historia, ha tenido muchos directores, que se empezó trabajando en la universidad, en las aulas de la universidad, luego se pasó al local del ex Banco Agrario, y ya desde el 2009 en un local propio en el centro de la ciudad. Como Centro de Idiomas no nos podíamos quedar atrás en este reto nuevo que hemos tenido que asumir todo el Perú y todo el mundo, ¿no? Como es la enseñanza virtual. Es por eso que desde el mes de mayo empezamos con las capacitaciones a todos nuestros docentes para poder brindar la enseñanza virtual, que ya se concretizó desde este mes de septiembre. Y damos gracias a Dios porque seguimos teniendo la acogida en estos últimos años y tenemos un sinnúmero de grupos formados, de niños, de jóvenes, de adultos, y también estamos dictándolo a distancia en Chota, en Selendí, en Chiclayo mismo, ¿no? Porque tenemos ya un prestigio ganado y muy bien reconocido. Quiero agradecer a todas las autoridades de la universidad, empezando por el señor rector, por todo el apoyo que siempre brindan al Centro de Idiomas y que ha llegado a ocupar este lugar tan importante en la comunidad cajamarquina. Al equipo de informática, de tesorería, a todos los que están involucrados en este proceso para la enseñanza virtual, muy especialmente a todos los profesores del Centro de Idiomas, que siempre se ponen la camiseta y dijeron desde un momento, sí, asumimos el reto. Y por eso es que ahora ya estamos todos trabajando en la enseñanza virtual. A nuestro personal administrativo, de igual manera, nuestro agradecimiento por todo su apoyo, y a todos ustedes, docentes participantes, a quienes nos debemos, ¿no? Nos siguen, han acudido a este seminario, y he dejado para el último el agradecimiento a Macmillan y a Oxford University Press, a Claudia Herrera en especial, y a Katia González, quienes siempre están pendientes de todo lo que necesitamos. Y cuando les dije que íbamos a asumir esta enseñanza remota, estamos ahí para apoyarla. Eso fue siempre lo que me dijeron, y estamos logrando esto que nos habíamos propuesto, ¿no? A nombre del señor rector de la Universidad Nacional de Cajamarca, doctor Angelmiro Montoya Mestanza, y el mío propio, se declara inaugurado este webinar, este seminario virtual, ¿no? Para celebrar el 37 aniversario del Centro de Idiomas de la Universidad Nacional de Cajamarca. We hope all of you make the most of this event to apply with your students in your teaching task. Welcome to everybody.
Thanks, Leticia. Quisiera rogar a todos los participantes, por favor, que mantengan sus micrófonos apagados y sus cámaras para favorecer la conectividad y no tengamos ningún inconveniente durante el evento, por favor. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this event. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today, celebrating our 37th anniversary. To start, we have webinar, the first webinar, which is sponsored by Oxford University Press, using digital technology in synchronous online classes for English language teaching. During this talk, we will approach the relevant topic of using digital technology in synchronous online classes for English language teaching from two main perspectives: planning classes and implementing digital resources with our students. It's going to be given by Professor Carlos Alberto Murillo Miranda. He was born in Costa Rica and has two teaching degrees from Universidad de Costa Rica, and is soon to graduate from the MA TESOL at the University of Nottingham from the United Kingdom. Carlos has experience teaching English to teenagers and adults from different ages in a Costa Rica public university. Carlos is currently a consultant for Oxford University Press and has recently started teaching a module of didactics for teaching in the Faculty of Education at Universidad de Costa Rica. He is passionate about second language motivation, EAP, DMCS, method for teaching English, blended learning, flipped classroom, implementing technological tools in online and classroom-based classes. Okay, let me introduce to Carlos Alberto Murillo Miranda, please.
Thank you very much, Maria Isabel, and welcome everyone to this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here. As Maria Isabel mentioned, my name is Carlos Murillo. I am from Costa Rica, and I will tell you a little bit about myself a little bit later on. Now, today we're going to take on the topic of using digital technology in synchronous online classes for English language teaching. Before we start, I would like you to be very active in the chat. And I'm going to need your help so that we can use some of the tools we're going to go over today together. So please remain active in the chat and help me participating in the activities we have prepared for the next 60 minutes. First, before we start, you must be wondering about the certificate. The certificate is going to be in the form of a badge, and I will give you more information at the end of our webinar. So further instructions will come on how to access our digital certificate. Now, today's aims. What are we going to go over during the next hour? First, the main challenges of synchronous online classes. What are those main challenges we usually face when we're in the class? And how to use digital technology in online synchronous teaching to face those challenges we have as teachers in synchronous online classes. And last, more tools from the ones that I have selected that can help us facing those main challenges of synchronous online classes. But first, I would like to start with a couple of teasers, two very easy to prepare activities for us to promote speaking in our online classes. So the first one is We'll Decide. Just give me a second. And that is the first tool that I'm going to show you. So right here, we have my wheel. To go to the wheel, we would just have to go to wheeldecide.com. It's for free, and it's very, very easy to prepare. In this case, I have already selected different questions. So I would just roll the wheel, And I get the question, in your country, when people eat out, would they normally tell the chef what they thought about the food? And then we continue rolling the wheel, and we're going to select the question we have for our students. As an example, if we go to our English file, and if we're working with our English file, we're going to find different discussion questions in different pages of this unit that is one of my favorite units in the English file, mood food. And in this case, what I did was I prepared them in a Word document. Why in a Word document? Because then I can copy them. I added some extra activities for my students, some extra questions for my students, and we go back to the wheel. When we come to the wheel, we come here to this section that says modify wheel. So I select it. And then I can decide which questions I'm going to eliminate, but also if I'm going to paste the list. If you're going to paste the list, all we have to do is copy the list of questions from our Word document or from our website and paste it right here. Add choices. So all my questions have been added very quickly. Wheel title, mood food, or something you decide that is more appropriate for what you're doing with your class. And then we select apply wheel changes. And then my wheel is set, and I click on it to see. So I can share the screen with my students, and this way we're going to promote more interactivity. We're going to ask our students to participate, and we're going to get the questions randomly. So please let me know in the chat what you think about the wheel decide. What happens if we don't have a list? Very easy to prepare as well. We come here, we select modify wheel, and we go below, and we just have to change the questions. Do you listen to music, etc.? And it's very, very easy to play with the wheel. Something very important, if we go to the main website, and rather than selecting modify the wheel, we already have some possibilities that have already been made, like this. What to do under quarantine. I think we can already. And then depending on the topic, we're going to talk about it, hone a new skill. What skill have you honed? And we can use it to promote interactivity with our students. Now, the next one is something I learned very recently, and I also have another tool that I'm going to show you where you can use it. But if we need, and if we're going to play a board game with our students, and we're going to play it digitally by sharing our screen, we need a dice. We need dice. So we just write in Google, roll a dice, enter. And then we get one. We can choose the sides, right? And then we can roll it again. And that way, very easily, by just writing roll a dice or roll dice, it could be roll a die as well. And it's always going to show us, and it's going to take us to this section. We can choose the numbers they're going to have, right? If they're going to have, if our die is going to have 8 sides, or 4, 6, 10, 12, or 20, or even more. And then we can implement it with our students. We could even, depending on the video conferencing tool that we're using, we could separate them into different groups. We share with them the link, and then they can play the board game in separate rooms. And they would just have to go to Google, write roll dice or roll a die, and then they're going to be able to play the game. Excellent. I'm glad that you liked both of them. We'll Decide is great and it's very easy to use. Now, about myself. I wrote 3 questions about myself. I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about myself. The first one is, I am 35 years old. You can see me through the camera, right? Number 2, I have been teaching online for 6 years. And number 3, I was a vegetarian for 8 years. Now, before we do anything, let's just think. If we're in a class and we're going to have this activity in a synchronous online session, we're not going to ask one by one, right? If we have 20 students, 25 students, or even 10, it's a lot to ask, oh, which one do you think is true? Which one do you think is false? Why? And then our whole class is just going to be about us discussing those 3 questions. And also, I asked the first person which one they think is true. And then if I start asking everyone else, everyone I have already asked, I'm going to lose their attention. So what is important and what can we use in this case? I'm going to share a link with you in the chat. If you have an iPhone, you just have to turn on the camera on your iPhone and put it on the QR code that I have right here in my presentation. And then it's going to give you the option to open. So if you have an iPhone, please just open your camera and put it in the QR code. And if we have another phone, it's very important that we need another few extra steps to use the QR code, but no problem, because I'm about to paste the link in our chat. Excellent. Someone has already answered it. And I'm going to go. This is how you're going to see it. Which of the following is true? I am 35 years old. I have been teaching online for 6 years. I was a vegetarian for 8 years. I want to know your opinion. And I see that you have already been answering. No one believes that I was a vegetarian for 8 years, right? Oh, there you go. Now we have more true. Not a lot of people think that I am 35 years old. So as the students answer, the percentages change. In this case, I'm going to get a lot of answers very quickly, rather than just asking one by one. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this polling tool in a few seconds, because we're getting more votes. So a lot of people have voted that I have been teaching online for 6 years. 41% of you have voted that I have been teaching online for 6 years. That is almost accurate, right? Because I have actually been teaching online for 8 years. So it has been a little bit longer. So I have been teaching online for 6 years. As you continue voting, is false, right? But then where it says I am 35 years old, 29.4 of you voted for that one. So I'm going to come back to that one in a few seconds. And I was a vegetarian for 8 years. 23.5% of you chose that it is true. And that is the one that is true. I was a vegetarian for 8 years. I wrote it in the simple past, because now I have switched to the dark side. And the 26.3% voted that I am 35 years old. In that case, right, it is false. I am actually 32 years old. This month, I turned 32. So thank you very much for participating. But now I'm going to show you how easy it is to create one of this, right? So just give me a second. We come to direct poll, right? What I like about direct poll is that we don't have to create an account, right? So we just come to directpoll.com, create your poll now, enter the question. Can we use the simple present for future meaning? As an example, if we are working with grammar, right? And then we answer yes, no. What is important? You can add as many questions as you want. There is not a limit. Then you can choose single choice or multiple choice. You can mark the correct answer, and you can decide if you're going to show the results in a percentage. So in terms of implementing this for grammar, it is great. What do I have to do next? I have read and agreed to the terms and conditions. We write our email, but we don't have to create an account. Save poll and send me the links. In this case, you get the links to your phone or your email, depending where you want to access it. And after that, you're going to get right here the link for your students to vote and the link to show the results. And you're going to get them to your emails as well. That is great because that means that we can create them ahead of time and we just have the links ready for our students. Now, let me go back to my presentation and let's start closing some tabs. As I said before, we're going to talk a little bit about the main challenges we have in online synchronous classes and how we can address them. The first one, the main challenge, is our video conferencing tools. Depending on the video conferencing tool that we have, we're going to have strengths and weaknesses. What could be those strengths? Well, we can create breakout rooms very easily so that we can divide our students in pairs, threes, in groups for them to further discuss some aspects. What is another strength? The easiness to create a link for students to access. What are some important weaknesses of video conferencing tools if we do not have breakout rooms, or if it's very difficult to create breakout rooms as in Microsoft Teams? It's very difficult, it's very time consuming for us teachers. Another weakness is if we can share the computer sound or if we cannot share the computer sound. But what we have to do is analyze the video conferencing tool we have access to and make and take advantage of the strengths that video conferencing tool has. So it's very important we focus on the strengths of the video conferencing tool that we have at hand. The next main challenge that we have is maintaining students engaged. Why? They have a lot of distractions at home. In the class, we can see them and we have them face-to-face when we're in classroom-based classes. But at home, right, a lot of people are passing by, there is background noise, the dog is barking, the family is having very loud conversations around the computer. Our students have their phones at hand and they have them near them, but we cannot see it. So it's very difficult to maintain students engaged through a long period of time online. But if they already have their phone, we can take advantage of it. In which ways? Well, the first one, we can use polling tools, right, for them to keep engaged. We can use games. We can prepare and use different tools for students to be active during the class. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about in a few minutes. Checking understanding during the class. In this case, it's very, very important whether we're using a flipped classroom approach with our students or whether we're not using it and we're going over all the details during our online synchronous session. It's very important to check our effectiveness during the class, to check our students' understanding during the class. So this is an aspect that is very, very important, and it's also not easy to achieve. Why? For the same reason I mentioned before, right? We cannot ask everyone, right, to share their opinion one by one, because then that is going to take our whole class. So it's very important that we take advantage of the different tools we're going to go over today to see how we can implement them to check understanding during the class. And then promoting interactivity. How to make it interactive for students so that they remain engaged in their class. So it's very, very important to promote interactivity, to promote participation. As an example, and I am sure we all teachers can relate, when we ask for a volunteer in the class, no one looks, right? Everyone is just looking at the front, trying to not get their name called. In my case, whether it's classroom-based or online classes, I always address students by their names, right? I never ask for volunteers. I just go ahead and I say, okay, Joe, can you please help me with this question? Katya, could you please help me, giving me an example of the simple present? So whether it's classroom-based or online, when we address them by their name first, they're always going to be concentrated in the class, because at any moment they might get a question, or they might get, or we might ask them to elicit an example of what we're studying. So it's very important to promote interactivity, and I strongly believe one of the tools we're going to go over in a few minutes works perfectly to promote interactivity. In this case, let's start. And I want to start by comparing 4 different tools. One of them we have already used, right? Direct poll. What are the advantages of direct poll? First, the audience size, it can be up to 500 people. Question type, I gave them a grade of B because we can only ask multiple choice questions. What is a very strong advantage? We can ask as many questions as we want. We have unlimited answers. In the case of Answer Garden, which we're going to use in a few minutes, the audience size is unlimited. The question type, we only have one. That is an open-ended question where we can choose our students to answer with 20 to 40 characters. We have unlimited questions, which is a great advantage. And then if we go over to Mentimeter, we have the same advantage, that is unlimited. Question type, we have a wide variety of question types. We're going to use one as an example later, but it has a very big downside, in my opinion. We can only ask 2 questions per presentation. So if you want to use Mentimeter and you have 8 activities you need your students to do, you have to create 4 different presentations and move from presentation to presentation. Which takes me to my favorite, Poll F. Polls everywhere. This is my favorite because we get unlimited questions, and in terms of question types, as you're going to see when we do the exercises, it has a wide variety of activities. But it's only available for an audience size of 25. So only 25 students can participate when we use Poll F. It's very, very useful if we have groups that range from 10 to 25 students, or from 5 to 25 students. But if we have more than 25 students, we will need to select a mix of other tools. And this is very important. We need to select the different tools we're going to use according to what we have in our class. Depending on audience, depending on the type of questions I want to ask, which of the following tools work best for my class. In terms of support, all of them have some type of support, but the most complete is FOLEF because they have webinar tutorials. So that is great for us because we can be accompanied with those tutorials on knowing how to create our polls. But now, let me go back, and we're going to start using those tools to see the advantages and disadvantages, right? And in this case, we're going to start with Answer Garden. So Answer Garden is very simple to do. In this case, we have an exercise here that says food quiz. Can you think one red fruit, one yellow fruit, one green fruit? Can you think of 2 kinds of food that some people are allergic to? So we're going to use number 2. So rather than asking our students one by one, we could come to Answer Garden. And another great aspect of Answer Garden is that if we click on the plus, we create an Answer Garden. We don't need to create an account, so that is great. And we're going to ask this question. Can you think of 2 kinds of food that some people are allergic to? Then we go a little bit lower. We select the answer length. It could be 40 characters, right? So that we give our students more possibility to write a little bit more. Remind your email. You can write your email if you want to be reminded of different things. We can choose lowercase, uppercase, or no change. We can decide how much time we're going to have the activity available, and then we just create it. Once we have created, we copy the link and we share it with our students. I'm going to paste it in the chat. So please click on the link in the chat and please answer the question. Can you think of 2 kinds of food some people are allergic to? Okay, we're already getting some answers. Peanuts and lobster, right? I wrote peanuts as the first example. Let's wait in for more answers on kinds of food that some people are allergic to. Peanuts and chocolate. I wouldn't like to be allergic to chocolate, right? Because I love chocolate, I love sweets. Fish, right? Fish and peanuts, excellent. And as we update it, we're going to get the answers from our students. Peanuts and seafood, gluten, right? And if someone repeats an answer, as an example, if we also get another peanuts and seafood exactly the same, it would tell us if we have received 2 of the same answers. Fish and peanuts. Now we have a lot more chocolate, fish, peanuts, right? We agree a lot. Citrus fruit. I love citrus fruit as well. In Costa Rica, we have a lot of citrus fruit, so it's part of our daily, right? Of our daily intake of food. Let me just update it one more time, and now we have a lot more, right? So we start building up and we start getting answers from our students, and then we can elicit them. Afterwards, I would ask a student for an example or two of what they chose or their opinion a little bit. So great aspects about Answer Garden. We don't have to create an account, and it's very easy and simple to create it. Now, if we go over to our next tool is Classroom Screen. Please let me know in the chat if you have used Classroom Screen before. What are some of the advantages that we have in Classroom Screen? Well, the backgrounds are beautiful, right? So you can select a themed background, or you can choose your own background. So you can personalize it a little bit. But very importantly, in the case of promoting participation from our students, we have this random name selector. So I'm just going to write random names. We would write the name of our students. Let's imagine I have 10 students. And Daniela. What is this going to help me about? I can choose randomly which of my students is going to participate. In this case, it's Christina's turn. But again, if we're discussing some food-related questions with my students, I can use the text option to build up some questions as an example. What kind of food do you like when you're happy? What kind of food do you like when you're sad? In my case, my answer for both of them is the same, right? Ice cream. When I'm happy or when I'm sad, that's what I like. And then this helps me a lot because I can use it as a whiteboard. So not only for discussing questions, this is just an example I could think of on how to use it, but I could also use it as a whiteboard, right? If I don't already have one in my video conferencing tool. But then I can also add a traffic light and a stopwatch. What happens if I'm having my class? With my class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it a little bit. I'm going to choose randomly who's going to participate. And then I would say, okay, it's Patricia's turn. And then Patricia, what kind of food do you like when you're happy? And I could set the chronometer for a specific time I want Patricia to talk about. To promote equal participation, right? I could select the traffic light. So green means Patricia can go ahead and talk. When her time is running over and it's time to wrap up, I can move it up to yellow. And when her time is up, I would move it to a red light. And we could use these tools for different activities. And it's going to help us a lot promote participation. But the most important and the one I like the most is that I have this section to write text. And then I would elicit an answer from another student. I can also select the option for dice. And for dice, we already saw one with Google. But if we're playing the board game together and we are and we need different tools that we have here, like the chronometer, I can select if I'm going to have 1, 2, or 3. And this is also a way in which I can use board games. I strongly suggest you explore deeply Classroom Screen. And then in this case, right, with Classroom Screen, you're going to be able to, at the end of the class, also let your students choose what they thought about the class today, right? So this is a way for us to assess how our students have been enjoying our class. So I strongly suggest you visit and explore Classroom screen and find different ways in which you can use it with your students. Now, I'm going to move over to my favorite, that is Polef. So first, I'm going to post it in the link. I'm going to post the link that you're going to follow in the chat. And if you enter the chat, and you click on the link, it's going to take you to my polls. And as I told you before, this is my favorite, right? And I'm going to show you why. So please click on the link. And the first one I have is just a different approach we could have used for the first activity we had. And it's I am 35 years old. So you're going to choose true or false. So please select your answers. As you already know, right? The answer is false. I know I look older, right? But sometimes life is difficult on some of us, right? So very good, false. Now, another way I could use it, so as we can see, we can use true or false exercises right here in Polef. If we move on to the next exercise, we could have, which of the following is true? I am 35 years old, I am from Honduras, or I was a vegetarian for 8 years. And again, it gives us a different type of exercise, in this case, multiple choice. So with Polef, I would have that ability to select more options for my students. I could play with it a little bit more. But my favorite, right, is coming up next. In this case, how does online teaching make me feel? We can also complete, right, with open-ended answers. So please answer the question, how does online teaching make me feel? Good, excellent. And as our students include words, right? Wonderful, great, alive, challenging, very good. That having challenges is great. Good, wonderful. A word cloud starts to create. We also have this option in Mentimeter, motivated, excellent, right? And as our students continue to add words, our word cloud starts shaping, right? In this case, it's very important, demanded, excellent, yes, I agree, right? It's very demanding to prepare our classes, alive, relaxed. In this case, this is very important to have a brainstorming activity. So as an example, if we're setting our students up for an interview or a job interview speaking activity, where we're going to divide them in separate rooms and they're going to interview each other for a job, this is great to give our students ideas on adjectives they can use. So we could ask them to share their strengths and weaknesses in 2 different activities, and that is going to help our students a lot. Very good. Thank you very much for answering. We're moving on to the next one. And I love this one. I have used it when we're discussing would you rather. So would you rather be able to see 10 minutes into your own future or 10 minutes into the future of anyone but yourself? So far, we have chosen my own future, right? I always choose anyone else's future but mine because I think I would like more to help others, and I wouldn't like to know what's coming up every 10 minutes in my life. But the idea of this was to show you a different type of example where students will need to select between two options. And now my favorite, a ranking, right? So it says, rank the following top 6 global problems in order of priority from the one you consider the most important to the least important. So this ranking gives us a lot of possibilities. If you're doing it on your phone, when you click on it, you can move it upwards or downwards. So you put on top the one you consider the most important global problem right now for us to fix. If you're using it in the computer, it works very similarly. So please arrange your ranking and select submit so that we can visualize the results. And as we get the results and as our students answer, the ranking is going to change to what the majority, right? To what the majority helps. So we can get a general idea from our students. Excellent, right? So division between the wealthy and the poor, that is also in my ranking, the most important global problem we have right now. All of them are very important. And as you can see, it continues shaping as our students submit their answers. Now, what are some other uses we could have for the ranking? The ranking is my favorite activity. The first day of classes, ranking order the activities you love doing from the most favorite to the least favorite. So we give our students a set of activities. They're going to rank them from the most favorite to the least. And what I would do next is I would separate them into breakout rooms, into different rooms, and ask them to share their ranking and say why they have chosen one to be the most favorite and another one to be the least favorite. So this was just to set an example. Sorry, I'm going to switch it. In terms of grammar, and someone answered very, very quickly, probably because I switched it. So let me just clear the responses. There you go. In the case of grammar, how can this ranking work for us to assess if our whole class knows the adverbs of frequency and which are more frequent than the others? We can create this ranking. We just share the link with our students, and then we can assess our whole group, right? Not just the one person we asked them for the answers during our online session, or the person who is willing to participate. But with this tool, I can guess, I can get all the responses from my students, and I'm going to know, because I get the results later, if someone misselected one option, right? So very good. Thank you very much. And let me go to the next one. I love this one. Where would you like to go on your vacation, on your next vacation? And as soon as quarantine is done, we hope we can do some traveling. And as students select the places, we're going to get marks on the map. So we can share and we can talk to our students about what most of their selections has been. Most of their selections have been, as an example, one person has chosen Europe, and we can decide if we remove the pin or not, but this is extremely useful as a preparation, right, for students before we're going to talk about future plans, about their plans for next vacation. This is very, very helpful and interactive. Now, how can we use this? If we're teaching online or students, as an example, when we have 2-syllable words that end in consonant, vowel, consonant, when we're teaching them if they should double that regular verb, if they should double the consonant before adding ed for that regular verb or not, how do we know that everyone knows how to differentiate the stress on a syllable? In this case, right, you're already selecting some answers. So our students would click where they believe the stress in the syllable is. And that way we can assess, because what happens if I say, okay, Joe, in which syllable can we find the stress in visit? So if Joe says, oh, in the first syllable, then our other students might just repeat the answer. The same example with prefer. In this case, right, the stressed syllable is the second, prefer. So we would double the consonant, and this is a way for us to assess as our students select, right, and they click on the image where the stressed syllable is, if our students are understanding, right, if they know, if our students are understanding how to select a stressed syllable. So these are just some examples of how we could use it in the class, and most importantly, how to check understanding from our students, right? In this case, it's very, very graphic for students. Now, I just wanted to show you one example in Mentimeter. In Mentimeter, in this case, we remember that we have only the option of 2 activities, but let's imagine our students are going to a job, we're going to have an activity about a job interview. As I said before, we can ask them to share strengths. So if a student, and that is always a very tough question in a job interview, if one of our students has no idea on what to share, if we do this activity, this is for a workload as we did in POLEF, but maybe we have more than 25 students, then this could help students who are doubtful of adjectives they can use in a job interview, and it's going to help them get ideas. Now, I'm going to switch up to Padlet. Please let me know in the chat if you have used Padlet before. And I'm going to show you 2 examples of how I have used the Padlet, and then we're going to make one very quickly for us to see. The first one, I'm going to show you my autobiography, right? So I could create a timeline for my students, and if we're practicing the simple past, we can ask them to share their autobiography. In my case, I was born in 1988. I started playing basketball since I was a child. All my family says that I was a very handsome kid, but sadly, I didn't grow up to the expectations. Then, as you know, I'm from Costa Rica. I went to San Luis Gonzaga High School in Cartago, Costa Rica. In 2016, my niece was born, and she changed the way on how I spend my salary. So everything goes to her now. And in 2017, I visited an active volcano. So I just selected 5 examples, but we can make it as long as we want to. But we could have our students, we could give them 10 minutes to create their autobiography while we're in the class. And then they could share it in groups, in separate groups, in pairs, or we could select a few examples to share with the class. So I love that in Padlet, we can have and create timelines. Another example, and I'm going to need your help with this one, tenses with future meaning, right? So if I'm addressing this topic with my students, I would complete the beginning, simple present. I can add a video, and it's very easy to add a video. I just paste the YouTube link, and then we can watch the video right here in my Padlet. As an example, it's already playing. And then I wrote examples. My bus leaves at 9 a.m. My flight leaves at 10 p.m. The class ends at 9:30 a.m. So I could give examples. Then I would complete it a little bit like present continuous for future arrangements, but then I can share it with my students. If you have an iPhone, you can turn on the camera and you can put the QR code, but I'm also going to paste the link in the chat. And there you go. If you click on it, it's going to take you to this Padlet. And imagining that you're my students, you can complete the information we need. So I'm going to ask you to include examples of sentences with future arrangements, and maybe some of the uses we have for going to and will. So you can edit it, and we're going to see it at the same time in place. I'm going to add one for will. Promises. Excellent. Some of you are already editing it. So thank you very much. Please continue. Our students can add videos, or students can ask pictures as well. So it is very, very interactive, and we would be, this would be a good way not necessarily to present grammar for the first time, but also to go over grammar with our students, maybe before a test or in a general way. Can you help me with going to? What are some of the uses of going to? For promises, we could ask our students to write below the examples. So as an example, for me, there are three very common promises. So promises, I will always love you, I will not tell anyone, I will pay you back, right? For me, those are the three most common promises people make. And excellent, right? So a lot of people interacting, a lot of people writing examples. And not only that, as I said before, when we choose the plus, you can decide if you upload a picture, if you post a link, if you Google something, or if you take a photo of yourselves. So let me just go to YouTube very quickly. Let's write simple present, explanation, and let's copy this link for the second one. Copy link address. If we go back to Padlet, and I, as a student, would like to add a video here that I consider important, I enter the URL, save, and that's it. The video is right there, available for everyone. So it would also be great for me to prepare materials for my students, and I just send them the link. Another example of how I have used it, but this one is a little bit, it's actually in Spanish. I have already done the activity of the timeline with my students, and we are studying the history of education, right, through the different ages, and they did it like this as well. And what is great is that it can go as far as we want to. How do we make a Padlet? We just select here, make a Padlet, and then we have different options. A wall, a canvas is great, a stream so that it's downwards, right? So maybe it could also be for a presentation, a grid. We can have a shelf, and I love the shelf. We can have a back channel to communicate. We can also have the map, very similar, and the timeline. So let's imagine, let's select the wall. We choose the name, we choose different characteristics. Start posting. And this one, we can move it around, right? So you're going to find different Padlets you can use. All of them are great, right? And one last activity. In this case, the Jamboard. I saw someone in the chat shared a Jamboard earlier. Jamboards are also great. They are part of Google. And I'm going to show you two examples on how I have used it with students. The first one is we were talking about the topic of megacities in English file upper intermediate book, right? And in this case, we have a reading about megacities related to Mexico City and Japan. And in this case, what I did was I prepared the Jamboard. I was lucky and I had only 6 students, right? So I divided them into pairs in separate rooms. And together I gave them time. I said, okay, group number 1 is going to use A, is going to use Jamboard number 1, Jamboard number 2 for group B, and Jamboard number 3 for group C. And in this case, what they had to do was go over the topic of megacities together. And the conversation was very, very enriching, right? The negotiation of meaning they had online is very similar to what they would have in the class, to choose the characteristics and to select the advantages and disadvantages. So as an example, characteristics, they would choose a sticky note, safe, crowded, right? And they could set it here. But then when they started going over advantages and disadvantages, they could choose green for advantages. As an example, job opportunities. And they would place it right here under advantages. They could play with the colors. So I just shared the link with my students and they worked on it. And here are some of the results, right? They worked on it. And then when we returned to our online session, they explained the characteristics they had selected for megacities, what were the advantages, and what were the disadvantages. So this is very, very useful to get our students working in pairs. Now, if I go back to my Jamboard home, the other example I wanted to show you, I just selected a fixed background, in this case, reporting verbs patterns, whether we're going to use a to plus infinitive after the reporting verb or an ing form, but again, this could be used for almost any grammar topic. And then I asked them to choose some verbs that they would have to use for each structure, and then some examples. She suggested not buying that medicine. So I gave them about, after I explained the grammar, I gave them about 10 to 15 minutes to get themselves in pairs and to create this Jamboard together. And then we used it to study for the test. So Jamboard is also a great opportunity and a great possibility for our students to get pair work together and to discuss and negotiate meaning during our online synchronous classes. In this case, we got different results from the different students. Some chose different verbs, which was very helpful. And in this case, that day I had a little bit more of time to plan my class. So I divided the Jamboards per animal, right? So I just posted a picture. So I would say, okay, you're going to use the eagle Jamboard. So it all depends on how much time we have to prepare for the class, but this is a great activity and we could use Jamboard in many, many, many ways. Now, let me go back to my presentation. I'm going to check the chat in a second. In this case, just before we move on to the questions, I wanted to tell you, well, first to thank you for your active engagement. I haven't been able to read the chat a lot, but I'm going to read it in the next few minutes. And very important, how to get your participation certificate. We have the QR code here. I'm going to post this link in the chat. And we're always very curious about how we will be able to receive our certificate for attending a webinar online. And to receive the certificate for this particular webinar, you will need to fill out the feedback form at the end of the session. That is through the link that we can see right there. And at the end of the feedback form, there's a place where you have to write your name and email address. Please do so that we can send your digital certificate. Your digital certificate will come in the form of a badge. You will be seeing this to your email box from the company Badger, and the email will say, congratulations, you earned a badge. Please follow the instructions provided by Badger to access your badge. So that is how we're going to get our participation diploma. And now, just give me a second to copy the link, to stop sharing, and to come back to our Google Meet class. I'm going to paste, I already pasted the link in the chat for the form that you're going to use to get your badge. And now it's time for us to go to the questions, right? So please let me know in the chat if you have any questions.
Hello, Carlos. Hello, everybody.
Oh, hello.
It's time for the questions now. Yeah, we're going to see in the chat if there are further questions from now on. But in the meantime, I would just like to share some of the comments that some of the participants have been also sharing in the chat box. With interesting comments about the presentation of today and our teaching experience in general. We have Ms. Leticia, for example, saying that it is amazing the number of tech tools we have to teach English nowadays, and I think we all agree. We have some comments also from Coach Miriam Ruiz saying that, well, everything that has been presented today has been excellent, congratulating us on this wonderful presentation. Thank you, Miriam Ruiz. We also would like to mention, well, congratulate, of course, the Language Center of the University for their 37th anniversary. And we would like to thank also the presence of Claudia Herrera from our friends from Macmillan. We are very happy at Oxford University Press to share with all the community following our mission, of course, of the University of Oxford to further the university's objective of excellence in research, scholarship, and education. We also have some comments from Daniel Galvez, mentioning that these activities well, are wonderful for him, and he's asking us to send us or to send you a copy of the presentation. Carlos, would you be so kind to share your presentation with us? And let me also remind everybody that this presentation is being recorded, so it's probably you will be receiving a link sharing also the recording of this presentation. I don't know, Carlos, maybe you would like to comment something on Roxana Acuña's comment. She's saying that it's essential for us to improve our knowledge using these kinds of tools in our classes. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes, I completely agree, right? They are very important, especially nowadays, right? Because we need to engage our students. We need to be able to check their understanding, and it's very difficult to do so through the camera. Some of them are usually a little bit shy, but I also think that all this learning we're having is also going to be useful when we go back to face-to-face classes, right? Because if we go back to classroom-based classes and we have 20 students, we can also continue using some of these tools to obtain information, valuable information from our students' understanding, and it can also help engage our students into our class.
Totally agree. Thank you very much, Carlos. And well, finally, just to mention a comment from Elizabeth Sanchez saying that these tools are incredible to engage students. And finally, Daniel Galvez said that he will put it in practice on Monday, which is great. So on the side of Oxford University Press, we would like to thank you for your great participation, for your excellent comments, and thank you also to the Language Center of Universidad de Cajamarca. Thank you, Carlos, of course. Back to you, Miss Maria Isabel.
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks a lot, Carlos, because of the workshop you have shared with us. Be sure that we are looking forward to applying this in class. And thanks to Oxford University Press for your support to this event. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much for having us, right? Thank you very much for taking Oxford University Press into account. And it's been a pleasure. You have been a great audience, and I hope we can see you again in the near future.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, dear colleagues, now we have our second webinar. It's sponsored by Macmillan Education Peru, and is Teaching Online Skills. This talk will be focused on methodological framework of each English language ability: reading, listening, speaking, and writing, and the strategies that can be used to adapt them to the teaching online. It's going to be given by Lori Caroline Salomon Recovery. She's from Ecuador. She has taught English as a foreign language for over 20 years in different countries in South America. A recipient of a highly competitive academic merit scholarship program from her country. She creates women English as a second language students in the United States as the beginning of her love relationship with languages and language teaching. As a teacher, she has had the opportunity to teach children, teenagers, and adults, as well as special needs learners. With a BFA from Washington University and a CILTA and TKT and Train the Trainer Cambridge certifications, she currently works as an academic consultant for Macmillan Education. Okay, let me introduce to Lori Caroline Salomon Recovery. Welcome, Lori.
Hello, thank you so much, Miss. Good morning, everybody. Can we check if you can hear me? Could you write yes in the chat box to make sure that you can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And the next question would be, can you see me? Because I can't see me. Excellent. Okay. So I'm very excited to be here. It's really awesome to have the opportunity to join you and share this morning with you. I'm gonna share my screen and let's see how I do this. Okay, here we go. Okay, there, you should be able to see my screen now. And okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to teach skills online. Teaching skills is obviously an important part of teaching English or teaching any language. Sometimes we focused a little bit too much on teaching grammar or teaching vocabulary, and we forget that at the end of the day, our students need to apply that grammar and need to apply that vocabulary to their skills. So let's start with a question. So which are the language skills? Maybe if you think about it, if you made a list, how would you identify those skills? We have 4 skills, and those are listening, reading, speaking, and writing. We divide them into receptive and productive. When we work all 4 skills, we get our students to improve their fluency, and through their fluency and practice, they can also improve their accuracy. So, when we talk about receptive skills, we talk about reading and listening. And I have conversations with teachers where they talk about receptive skills as passive skills. And we have to be very careful that we don't identify these skills as passive, because even when our students are in a receptive mode, we want them to be active listeners and active readers. We want them to engage with the content. We want them to participate actively in the process. We don't want them to just receive information. We want them to be able to act and engage. So if we consider the stages of a receptive lesson, do you know the 3 stages of a receptive lesson? Here we have a reading lesson, and if you look at the activities, you should be able to identify those lessons. Maybe you can write them in the chat box. What do you think are the 3 stages of a receptive lesson? So I can see the chat box. I'm going to guess that you are writing the correct answers, and I'm going to share them with you. So the first part of a receptive lesson is the before or the pre. The second part of a receptive lesson is the while. And the last part of a receptive lesson is the after or the post. So if we consider these as part of a reading lesson, then we have the before you read, while you read, and after you read. And this is true for young learners. This is true also for teenagers and grown-ups. This is the same framework for any receptive lesson. This is also true of a reading lesson, and it's true of a listening lesson. So why do we have these 3 stages? We have 3 stages because each one has a very specific objective. When we look at the pre-stage, we want to create anticipation, we want to activate prior knowledge, and we want to help our students to make predictions. In the while stage, we're going to get our students to develop all those sub-skills. And finally, when we get to the post stage, we get our students to do a productive task, either speaking or writing. And the important thing to notice is that while we are doing each one of these stages, we're giving our students plenty of opportunities to be productive. So even if they are in a receptive lesson where the main task is to listen or the main task is to read, they still are going to have plenty of opportunities to speak or to write. So how does this work if we're working online, if we're teaching our students virtually? When we consider virtual classes, we have to consider our time frame, and we have to be aware that there's not enough time to do everything when we are on the virtual class, when we're teaching through Zoom or we are teaching through Google Meet. So we need to consider using synchronous and asynchronous learning. And there are 3 factors to take into account. First, the aim of the task. What are the objectives? What is it that we want our students to be able to do? Second, the level of our students. How much support they need to be able to achieve those objectives. And finally, their age. Are our learners independent enough? Does their age allow them to be able to do these activities independently? So these are the 3 factors that we need to take into consideration when we decide which activities we need to do synchronously in the classroom, in the virtual lesson, and which ones we can do asynchronously, letting our students work independently. Also, we need to consider if our students are going to be working online or if they're going to be working offline. And it's very important to give a lot of time for offline activities. We don't want our students to be completely online all the time. Being online, it's a taxing activity, it's tiring, it requires lots of mental energy. So let's design our activities so that our students can also spend time working offline. So how do we do this? Let's start with the first stage, and that's the pre-stage or the before stage. And as we mentioned, this stage helps our students to make predictions, to personalize the topic, to activate prior knowledge, and to develop critical thinking. And as we mentioned before, we need to create opportunities for learners' production. So if we consider how to balance online and offline and synchronous and asynchronous learning, we might work with a chart where we list very clearly all the stages or sub-stages of our stage, in this case, the pre-stage, and how we're going to work those stages. Are we going to do it online? Are we going to do it offline? Are we going to do it synchronous or asynchronous? So for example, as we say before, we want our students to make predictions. We want them to personalize the topic. We want them to activate prior knowledge, to develop critical thinking, and to create opportunities for production. As teachers, it's our role to decide how we work these different activities. So for example, is it possible to get our students to make predictions online? Is it possible to get them to make predictions offline? Can they make the predictions in a synchronous activity? Can they make predictions in an asynchronous activity? That is for us to decide and to plan. And there are not right or wrong answers here. The only thing that we need to consider is that not everything can be done synchronously and online. Other than that, we have the freedom and the flexibility to decide how to work our class. So if we look at an example, and this is the before read questions of that lesson we saw before, we have two questions. Look at the title of the article. Do you know any amazing animals? Look at the photos. What do you know about these animals? So let's look at some examples of how we can do these questions in different formats. So let's start with online asynchronous. And this is a personalization activity because each student is going to say what they think, in their opinion, what is an amazing animal. One way to do it online and to do it asynchronously is to do it using Padlet. We can get each of our students to choose an animal that they think is amazing and to say why. And what I really want you to pay attention to here is that within the title of the activity, we're giving them a sentence frame. So even students who might need a little help feel supported because we have a scaffold. So it says, in your opinion, which is an amazing animal, and they have a sentence frame so they know what to write. We have an empty space where they're going to write the animal, are amazing animals because they are, and they know that they have to finish the sentence with a description. So our students can work independently because they have the scaffold they need to be able to do it. Maybe our stronger students won't need it, but maybe some of our weaker students can use it to be able to do it on their own. Once we have our students doing this activity, we are getting them to personalize the topic, and we are getting them to produce language in the written form. And you remember that I told you that we have to create opportunities for our learners to produce? Well, this is one way to do it, using an online resource. Another thing we can do, for example, using, I really like this resource, it's called Bubbles, and this one allows for students to collaborate by creating a mind map. So again, we get our students to think about amazing animals and to come up with different reasons why these animals are amazing. So they can say, for example, that dogs are smart, they're friendly, they're beautiful, or sharks are fast, hunters strong. Once your students work together to create this mind map, they come to your class, and in class you can send them to the breakout rooms, you scaffold the activity for them, you give them a very clear sentence frame to work with. I think animal in plural are amazing animals because they are adjective description. And I have heard teachers who said that one of the problems they have is that students are constantly using translators in class, that they rely on Google Translate to participate in class. And the reason students do that is because they don't have the vocabulary or the grammar or the structure to be able to express themselves. Maybe we're asking them to do things that they are not ready to do and that they haven't given support to do. So one way to avoid our students using translators in class is to give them a clear sentence frame to use. If they know this is the sentence they need to use, then every student, the stronger one, the weaker one, has a scaffold to be able to participate. Another thing that we can use, and this is one of my favorite tools of all times, is a KWA-HL chart. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. Many of you have probably used it. And I've been doing lots of research about these charts because, as I said, they are one of my favorite resources. And they are great at activating prior knowledge. The problem with these charts is that if you read the research, they are going to tell you that they are not effective, that they are really not an effective tool. And it's not that the chart is not effective. The thing is that we don't use it correctly. Many times we use these charts almost as an additional worksheet where students fill out information, they finish, they stuck it into a notebook, and we forget about it. And if you look at the chart, the idea is for our students, our learners, to be able to track and to decide what they want to know, what they know, and what they are going to learn. So we start with the know. This is where students write what they already know about a topic, so they are activating their prior knowledge. We go on to wonder, and this is where they tap into their curiosity, where they begin to ask their own questions. I love the how because this empowers students. How are you going to get the answer to your questions? And finally, you have learn, where they reflect about the process and they do the metacognitive process. The thing is that if we just fill out this chart and put it back into a notebook, we're not really doing the process correctly. How about the know? Is everything that our students write here actual, correct information? Are we really checking to see that there are not some misconceptions? How about having our students compare what they know and what they learned and see if they match? Could it be that the things they thought they knew were not really correct information? How about what they wonder? Have we got our students to compare what they wonder and what they learned and see if they really got all the answers to all their questions? Maybe some of those questions were answered, but some of those questions are still unanswered. In that case, Can we invite them to complete again the how part and see which of those questions are still up for grabs? In a way, they still need to find answers to those questions. It's really important for students, younger students, older students, it doesn't matter, to get the answers they need. So this is a chart that we can use. We can ask our students to fill out, and then in class we get our students to talk about it, and anytime we move on, they can go back and reflect on what information was correct, what information was not correct, and what things they still need to find out. Another thing that we can do, and this is from Harvard University Zero Project, is to use visible thinking routines to develop critical thinking in our students. One of the easiest routines to use is to use see, think, wonder. It's a 3-step process where students look at an image and they talk about what they see, then they talk about what they think, and finally they talk about what they wonder. And we can do it with a very simple chart. This is something that our students, our younger students and older students can do. And what I love about this example that I have here is obviously a very young student, and he's using the language to express what he sees, what he thinks. And in the corner, he has las bananas a 5. For, I'm guessing the K is kilo. So he's even using his imagination to express his ideas. So this is a really good strategy that we can use first asynchronously, but we can also use it in class. We can use it in class. We can teach, for example, our students 3 different TPR gestures, so they know that when they are talking about I see, they have to use their little hands. When they're talking about I think, they can do the gesture, and when they are wondering, they can scratch their head. This if it is for younger students. If we're working with older students, we can ask them to write their answers in the chat box. So for example, if we have this activity where we have an image and we ask our students to talk about what they see, we can ask them to write it in the chat box. So let's do a test. Okay, I can't see the chat box, so I don't know if somebody can read it for me, but what do you see in the picture? Can you write it in the chat box? Okay, so probably some of you said that you see a man, you see a child, you see a tent, you see a lamp. What about if you said that you see a father and a son? This is where we need to make the clear distinction between what we see and what we think, because we really have no way of knowing if this is a father and a son. This could be a brother and a younger brother. This could be a babysitter and a kid. So it is important to show our students the difference between different thinking dispositions. And as I said, we can ask them to do it asynchronously using a piece of paper, or we can do it in class using the Zoom rooms, the breakout rooms, or we can also do it using the chat box. As I said, always creating opportunities for student production. Okay, finally, we can use activities and strategies such as think, pair, share to get our students to interact in different patterns. Always give our students time to think before they participate. They should have individual time to come up with their own ideas. And this is a table that I really like, because this is a way for students to write down and to have a visible, clear frame to use in the activity. So first, individually, they think and they write their opinion. What do I think about it? Then when they do pair, they write what their partner thinks, and they might be able to connect the ideas, see which ideas are the same, which ideas are different, which ideas are similar, which ideas are totally opposites. And finally, they get to decide what they will share. This is an important step because it allows for students to prepare, to have thinking time. It's always important to give our students the time first to think about what they think and to come up with the language they want to use, then to work in a small group, to work with just one other person, because that's going to allow them to build up their confidence. Not only their confidence about the language they're going to use, but also their confidence about their opinions. If somebody else has similar opinions, we feel validated. So it's easier to then go ahead and share in a whole class environment. So we can use this kind of chart, have our students work in breakout rooms, and then come back and share with the rest of the class. And as always, it is very important to give our students a scaffold so they can participate effectively, and so that we don't have the problem that students are just translating using some online system because they don't know how to express their ideas. So if we want them to use think, pair, share, we can give them sentence frames so they know how to express their ideas. For example, I think, animal in plural, are amazing because they are description. If they're going to talk about what their friend or their partner share, then they can say she or he thinks are amazing because, and if they're going to talk about ways they both agree, then they can say we both think. So very simple sentence frames that are going to support our weaker students. And maybe our stronger students don't need them, but it's good for them to know how to do it. An important thing to remember is that when we send our students out to the breakout rooms, they can see our screen. So if you're going to use some sort of scaffolding sentence frame, it is important that you have some format that they can use in their computer. So you can give it to them on a PDF file, or if they are older independent students, you can ask them to take a screenshot so they have the scaffold so they can use it in the breakout rooms. So we have completed a few examples of the pre-stage, and we go on to the while stage. And as we mentioned before, here's where our students are going to develop the soft skills. And the question would be, what are those soft skills? So if I asked you, can you name the soft skills of reading and listening? Can you think about those for a few moments? What are some of the soft skills of reading and listening? When we want our students to develop these skills, what is it that we want them to be able to do? And if you do your research, you're going to find lots of different definitions, lots of different classifications, but this one is from CELTA training. This is how CELTA trainers classify the soft skills. So for reading, we have reading for gist or global understanding. We have reading for detail, skimming and scanning, deducing meaning from context, predicting, inferring attitude, mood, and feeling, understanding the organization of the text, understanding discourse markers, and note-taking. And if you notice, they are very similar to the skills of listening because they are both receptive skills. So for listening, we have listening for gist or for global understanding, listening for detail, predicting, deducing meaning from context, inferring attitude, feelings, and mood, and intensive listening. So when we are planning our while stage, one more time, we need to decide how I'm going to balance these activities. we really don't have a lot of class time to do all of this online or to do all of this in a synchronous fashion. So we need to consider how are we going to balance the online and offline activities, and how are we going to balance the synchronous and the asynchronous learning. So again, this is absolutely up to you. You get to decide what you think you need to do in class, what you need to do off class, what your students can do independently. One more time, there are 3 factors to consider. You need to consider the aim of the activity. What is it that you want your students to be able to do? You need to consider the level of your students. Are they at a level where they can do all of these activities independently? How much support do they need? And finally, you need to consider the age of your students. Are they young, so they need more support? Are they older, so they can work independently? And okay, so one thing to consider is the reading for gist or listening for gist activities. When we want our students to read for gist, we want them to be able to get the general idea from the text by doing a quick reading. We don't want them to stop, to go back, to get a dictionary, to underline, to make a list of words. When we're reading for gist, we want them to be able to read the text fairly quickly and get a general understanding, which is the same we want them to do when they're listening for gist. When they're listening for gist, we want them to listen to the whole text without interruptions and to get a general understanding just from listening once or twice. That's it, tops. We do not want our students to go back, start listening again, stop, rewind, fast forward, stop, ask somebody else what they think. This is a soft skill when we want them to be able to get a general understanding. So this would be the one activity that you absolutely have to do in class. This is the one activity that you have to do on your virtual class during a synchronous learning process, because you need to be able to make sure that students are doing it correctly. That means that they're going to read the text in 2 or 3 minutes and get a general sense, that they're going to listen to the audio once or twice, depending on the level, and they are going to get the general sense. So when we are doing our lesson planning, we absolutely have to consider that the reading for gist activity or the listening for gist activity has to be done in class. The other activities, once more, that is a decision that you need to make. For example, read for detail. If we have a fairly quick class where everybody is pretty much at the same level, and we know that they will be able to do it in 3-4 minutes, this is something we can do online synchronously. But what about if we have a class where some of the students are very fast and some of the students are slower? Some of the students have a higher level, more proficiency. Some of the students need lots of more support. So some of our students are going to be able to do the reading in 2 or 3 minutes, but some of our students are going to take much longer, maybe up to 10 minutes to answer the questions. In this case, we need to consider what would be better. Is it better to do it online? Is it better to do it offline, asynchronously, so every student can work at their own pace? And then when we come to class, we can discuss our answers. Same thing. What about deducing meaning from context? If we have a pretty quick class, very high level, everybody is pretty much at the same level, so they work more or less at the same pace, it might be worth doing it online. But if we have a class where some of the students are very fast, some of the students are slower, some students don't need any support, some of the students might need to do the activity, taking more careful steps, taking longer, then it might not be very effective to do it online. It might be better to have students do it independently after we have modeled the process. As always, create opportunities for production. And you can see creating opportunities for production is something that we can do online, offline, synchronously, and asynchronously, because we can get our students to participate in class using the mic, we can get them to use the chat box, but we can also get them to use some digital resource. For example, they can use Flipgrid, they can use Padlet, they can use Google Classroom. So there are many options. So let me show you an example. This is from our series, American Inside Out Evolution, and is a reading about the generation gap. And as you can see, it's not very long, and it has a first activity that is a reading for gist activity. So as we mentioned, anytime you're doing a reading for gist or a listening for gist, this has to be a synchronous online activity. So we get our students to read the question, which is read the profiles below. Which generation do you belong to? And they have two descriptions. They read the questions and they decide which generation they belong to. So if we were in class, I would give you 2 minutes to read this text. And then you would write in the chat box your generation. So let's give it a go. I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes. So it's 11:12. You have until 11:14 to read the text and decide which is your generation. Ready, set, go. Okay, and when you're ready, you can write your answers in the chat box. Which generation do you belong to? Okay, so after you get your students to read the text and to answer through the chat box, if you're working on Zoom or if you have the breakout rooms in Google Meet, you can send them to the Google Meet, to the breakout rooms to compare their answers. Why do they think they belong to one generation, or why do they think they belong to the other generation? Then we would go to the second activity where we get our students to read for detail. And here's where you need to decide who are your students, what are their abilities, how independent are they, what is more effective? Is it more effective to have students work in class because they are all pretty much at the same level? It won't take them very long and they can do it fairly quickly, or you have a very different kind of class where some students are slower, some students are faster. What is going to work better for you? So if you see here, you have 5 questions. You need to consider how long is this going to take my students? Are they going to be able to answer these 5 questions fairly quickly, or is it better to use this class time to do some production activity and have this activity as something they can do independently, offline, and then compare their answers in class. So when the students come back with their answers, next class, you can send them to the breakout rooms. They can talk and compare their answers. They can find evidence in the text. They can see if they agree or disagree, and then they are ready to participate in an open class feedback session. What about if you're doing a listening? Same structure. If we're going to do a listening for gist, if we're going to do a listening for global understanding, we want our students to do it in class, online, so we can control the process. We can ask them to make predictions, talk about who these people are, maybe give us some information that you know about the 3 different actors. For example, who is the boy or the man? Who are the 2 girls? Are they famous? What movies have they been in? Do they, I don't know, have they been awarded any Oscars? And then we do the listening, where they're going to listen for global understanding. So they might listen once or twice, depending on the level. We then send them to the breakout rooms so they can compare their answers. If we're going to do a listening for detail or listening for specific information, we need to decide what's going to work better. If we have a fairly proficient class where everybody has very strong listening abilities, we might be able to do it in class. But if we have some students who might need to listen to the audio 3 times, 4 times, some students who are very painstaking and they're going to really want to stop and listen and rewind and go forward and go back, and some students who are just going to listen once and they understand everything, this might be more effective as an offline activity where students do it independently. Each student can take as much time as they need, and when they come back to class, you can start the class by sending them to the Zoom, to the breakout rooms to compare their answers, to find evidence of the answers, to see where did you hear that, where was that answer, and have an opportunity for production, have an opportunity to use the language in a productive way. So this covers the first 2 stages of a receptive lesson. We have talked about the pre-stage, where we get our students to create anticipation, to activate prior knowledge, to make predictions. We talked about the while stage, where they develop their soft skills. And as we mentioned before, we don't want to call this kind of lesson a passive lesson, because we want them to be active and we want to end the lesson in a productive task. We want our students through all the stages to have opportunities for production, but we also want the last part of the lesson to be a task where they do either speaking or a writing activity. So even if the lesson is a receptive lesson, it's always going to end up with some sort of productive task. So let's look at what a productive task or a productive lesson looks like. When we talk about productive skills, we talk about writing and speaking. So this is a lesson from one of our series called Gateway Second Edition, and it's a perfect example of what a writing lesson framework looks like. If you look at this lesson, you're going to find all the stages of a writing lesson. So I want you to take a few moments to look at the lesson and see if you can identify the different stages of a writing lesson. So what are those stages and where do you find them in this lesson? So maybe you can write them in the chat box. What are the stages of this lesson? What are the stages of a writing lesson? Do you have any ideas? Okay, so let's look at those stages. The first one is the leading. This is where we get our students excited about the topic, where we engage them, where we get them to make predictions, to activate prior knowledge about the writing activity. Then we have the second stage, and it's a reading. And a very good question could be, why do we have a reading in a writing lesson? We have a reading in a writing lesson because we want to give our students a model of what they have to do. So if we want them to write, in this case, this is a review. This is a film review. If we want them to write a review about a film, they need to know what it looks like. They need to see what are the different parts, what are some of the conventions, what is an example of what it looks like. Then we have content preparation and we have language preparation. And these two stages are super important, and we have to be careful to do both. We want language preparation because, as we said, we always have to give our students the language to use so they don't rely on using translators. If you don't prepare the language, then they don't have the tools to be able to do the writing activity. So if we want them to write a review, well, they need to know what are some of the words that relate to a movie. For example, star, plot, production, realistic, critical. They also need to know some of the adjectives they can use to talk about a film: exciting, scary, boring, interesting, fascinating. So we need to give them that language and help them prepare to use that language. But also, we need to give them time to prepare the content, to come up with their ideas, to brainstorm, to compare ideas with their classmates, to think about which movie they would like to review, why they chose that movie, what they think about the movie. And finally, we need a writing task. After we have completed all the stages, they have the opportunity to write the actual review. And in this lesson, there is one stage that is missing. There is one stage that is critical in any learning process and is not here. So I ask you, what do you think is the stage that is not in this lesson, but it's critical to the learning process? If you think you know, could you write it in the chat box and share your ideas with the rest of the people here? What do you think is the one part of this lesson that we do not have here? Can you guess? Do you know? Can you maybe write it? So if you guessed feedback, that is correct. Every lesson has to end with feedback. So one more time, when we think about planning our lesson, we have to think about finding a balance between online and offline and synchronous and asynchronous learning. So if we look at our writing lesson, we have listening, reading, language preparation, content preparation, writing, feedback, and one more time, create opportunities for production, because we always have to give our students the opportunity to compare ideas, to talk, to discuss. You can do it through the chat line, you can do it in breakout rooms, but they always have to have that opportunity to be productive in class. So if we look at these different stages, which ones can we do online, which ones offline, which ones synchronous, which one asynchronous? Before, when we were talking about listening and reading, we said that you absolutely have to do the listening for gist or reading for gist online and synchronously. But in these stages, it is absolutely, oh, sorry, I went too far. Here we go. In this lesson, you can actually decide how you're going to do it. How about the leading? Is that something you can get your students to prepare independently before class? And then when we are in class, we can have a discussion. What about the reading? Is it necessary to do it in class, or can they do it independently? How about language preparation, content preparation, writing? Do we need our students to do the writing in class, or is it something they can do independently? And super important, how about feedback? Are there ways for our students to give feedback offline? Well, maybe not offline, but are there ways for students to give feedback in an asynchronous way? So these are all the questions that we need to consider when we are planning our lesson, and we need to find a balance. So let me give you an example. This is a way to do the offline asynchronous leading. This is the leading from that lesson we looked at, the one about the movie review. And if you see, they are asked to work with a partner, and they ask them the question, when deciding whether to watch a film, how important are these elements? And they have to rank them from 1 to 10, 1 being not important, 10 very important. And they have different options. For example, the stars, the genre, the plot, the length, the special effects, the soundtrack, the setting and location, reviews and recommendations. And then the second activity, compare your answers with the rest of the class. So here you have a chance to decide what do you think is more important, how you want to organize your lesson. Would it be possible to get your students to do their own ranking before class? So when they come to class, they already have a departing point. For example, you can use a resource such as Polls Everywhere. In Polls Everywhere, you share a link and your students vote. So every student in the class can vote about what they think is the most important. You're going to have a final chart, and then your students can do the second part where they compare their answers with the rest of the class. Where do they get information about the rest of the class? In the poll. So they already know that maybe most of the class thinks that the stars and the supporting actors are very important, but the special effects and visuals are even more important. And again, as we said, we want to scaffold the activities for them. We want to make sure that they have the language they need to be able to speak. We don't want them to fall back on using Google Translator. So we give them sentence frames or sentence examples. So they know that to agree, they can say, I agree. The stars and supporting actors are very important. Maybe they say, I disagree. I don't care about the special effects and visuals. Or maybe they say what they think is more important. So for example, I think the plot is more important than the length. So we can get our students to do the first part of the leading using an asynchronous resource, such as Poll Everywhere. We give them a clear scaffold, a clear sentence frame, so they know how to speak about the topic. And then in class, we have very productive time talking and comparing ideas and maybe reaching an agreement. And it's very good that you look at the questions, it says rank them from 1 to 10. A good way to get our students to speak in class is to give a very clear task. So for example, agree on a ranking. You can send your students in pairs to the breakout rooms. Everyone has their own rank because they did it before class. So now they have to agree on a ranking of the top 3 elements. So they have to reach an agreement between their ideas. That is an activity with a clear task, a clear aim, and it gives them something to work towards. What about if we want to do it in a synchronous way? We want to do it in class. We don't want to do it offline. We want to do it directly in class, same activity. Well, one more time, we create a very clear scaffold so our students can talk about it. For example, we give them sentences. For me, the most important thing is, I don't really care about that, or whatever isn't important at all. And we can send them to the breakout rooms. And one more time, give them a clear task. What is it that we want them to do? To rank. So they have to agree. Reaching an agreement is going to be the skill that they need to develop. They can compare then their answers with the rest of the class. If we consider these 2 different activities, in the end, they achieve the same purpose. They get our students thinking about the topic, they activate their prior knowledge, they give them opportunities for speaking and production in class, but they do it in 2 different ways. They're going to take different time. It's not the same to reach for a whole agreement, departing from nothing that when you already have some information. So both are effective. What we need to decide as teachers is how we want to do it. One more time, if we look at the lesson, so here we have all the different elements. We have the leading. I already showed you how we can do it online or offline. Same thing with the reading. You can decide to do it in class. You can decide to do it offline independently. If your students do it in class, you might want to set up a very clear time limit. You can tell them that the first time is going to be a reading for GIS, so they do it very quickly. Or you can ask them to read for specific information so they can answer the vocabulary questions. But then you need to consider which other activities they need to do offline so you can compensate for the time that that's going to take. Same with the content preparation. Is it possible for students to brainstorm before class? Can they use a mind map tool? Can they prepare an actual physical mind map and take a picture so they can share it in class? So these are decisions that you have to take. But very importantly is to consider the writing task. Lots of research shows that the writing task becomes more effective, students become more motivated, they work harder when there's a real audience. So a key element to any writing task that you do in your classroom is to make sure that your students feel that somebody is going to read it, and not just the teacher. So it is a good idea to use a tool such as Google Docs. This gives your students an audience for the activity. If I know my classmates are going to read it, if I know my classmates are going to write comments, if I know that what I do is going to be visible, I work harder. So you can get your students to write the text. And many times when we ask students to give feedback, we find ourselves with students who read the text and say, I know it was perfect, it was good. Yes, it was good. It's a little bit like the Google Translator thing. So why are students saying that it's perfect? Why are students saying that it's good, that they didn't find any problems? Most of the times is because they don't have a clear rubric to work from. They don't have a clear instruction as to what to read for. So it is a very good idea to have two kinds of rubrics for the feedback, and very specific, very limited items. If my students are going to read a text, and let's say that we're working with beginner students, a very simple instruction is to look for run-on sentences. I don't want them to look at run-on sentences, a verb-subject agreement, a numeric agreement, a pronoun agreement, because they don't have the ability to look at so many things. They are learners. But if we give them very specific, very punctual things to look at, for example, let's look at run-on sentences. We know that there are 3 ways to connect sentences. Look at the text, check and see if every sentence is connected to the next sentence correctly. That's it. That is one way to do feedback. And also give them something content related to look for. So for example, you can tell them, okay, we're going to look at run-on sentences, and additionally, we're going to look at coherence. Do all the sentences have cohesion? Do they make sense? Do they flow logically? Is there a correct transition from the first paragraph, which is the introduction, to the second, to the third, to the conclusion? Is the topic always worked coherently? So if we give our students very clear rubrics, then they can give better feedback. You can also ask them to make comments about things that they like especially, and things that were not clear, for example, so they know exactly what to look at. So this is going to help our students in the writing process, because the writing becomes collaborative. Everybody is helping each other. It gives them a clear audience, which makes them work harder. It motivates them. It pushes them to make a harder effort or a bigger effort. And it helps them to self-assess and to assess other people's writing. If we're working with younger students, we can also do it. This is an example from Academy Stars, and this is a writing lesson which is already scaffolded for you. So we start with a very simple language instruction. We're going to look at full stops at the end of the sentence. That's what our students are going to pay special attention to, that they always use a capital letter and a full stop. Then they have a very simple scaffolded practice where they have to correct the sentences. And we have 2 examples so they can do it. But this also functions as content preparation, because this is the activity that we want them to do, and this is what the activity has to look like. So it needs 3 sentences. The first 2 sentences are an example, or I'm sorry, the first 2 sentences are a description. The third sentence is the answer and a drawing. If we do this first activity and this second activity with our students in class, because as I said, we have to consider the 3 factors. What is the aim of the activity? What is the age of our students? And what is the level of our students? So here our students are young and they have a low level, so they need lots of support. So we can do activity 1, activity 2 in class, so they get all the support they need. Then they already prepared to do activity 3 independently of class. Why do we want our students to do activity 3 independently of class? Because young learners take very long to complete this kind of activity. So this is an activity that they can do with the help of mom or dad. They already know how to do it because we did the first part in class. They can take however long they want to do the drawing, to color, etc. And then we can take to ask them to ask mommy or daddy to take a picture they can send it to us through WhatsApp, and maybe we can create a PowerPoint presentation for the next class where everybody gets to see their work. Or we can ask them to upload it to Padlet so everybody can look at the work. Or we can ask them to include it in our learning management system, CISO, Edmodo, Google Classroom, so everybody can see what we are doing. And finally, we get to, I think one of the most challenging things is to get our students to speak, especially now that we're working online. So let's look at a speaking lesson. And when we look at a speaking lesson, we notice that they are very similar to a writing lesson. We always start with the lead-in, where we introduce the topic. We have language preparation, because as we said before, we need to give our students the language they're going to use so they can express themselves. We have content preparation. And finally, we have the speaking task. The reason I chose this one to share with you, this one is from Optimize, is because this one has a really good strategy for our classes, which is the flipped classroom technique, where we get our students to prepare before they come to class by watching a video, doing a reading, etc. In this case, we're getting them to watch a video. So they watch the video before the actual class. By the time they come to class, they are already prepared. They already have ideas. They had the opportunity to watch the video as many times as they needed, so they can participate in class most effectively. And we can use our class time most effectively. If we spend class time watching videos, it's a bit of a dead time. So it's way more effective to get students to do it before class, and then they're ready to participate, to give opinions, to share ideas, etc. With that same idea, we can get our students to do content preparation before class. If our students have lots of thinking time, they feel more confident to participate. So if they watch the video and they prepare their content when they come to class, they feel better prepared to participate productively. So how do we get our students to speak? How do we get them to turn on their minds and talk in class? First, as I mentioned before, use a synchronous task. You can use flipped classroom, where they watch the video before. You can use brainstorming tools, so they can already have their ideas well thought out, well organized. Always give learners individual thinking time. And here we have few keywords. We have individual and thinking. It's impossible to think together. You need your own time to come up with your own ideas, to discover how you feel about a topic, to measure your understanding. Then you can talk to somebody else and compare and contrast and etc. But first, you have to think on your own. So it needs to be individual. And consider the word time. Sometimes we are very quick to expect answers. We ask a question and we expect an immediate answer. And what happens is that only the fastest student is the one who's going to be able to answer. So incorporate waiting time. As if you're working online and your students use the chat box, create a specific system where they know that they can write their answer yet. Okay, this is the question. Everybody think, don't answer yet, think. Because what happens is that the fastest people write the answers in the chat box, and lots of students think, well, somebody else already answered. So consider having a waiting time. If you have a question, same thing with the microphones. If you're using open mics, same thing. We're going to think about the question. Nobody answers. You might want to use a timer so they know how much time they have available to think. Do pair work or group work before class share. As I said before, having the opportunity to compare your ideas with somebody else, to see that somebody else has the same answers or the same opinions, to practice using the language in a very safe pair or a very safe small group, gives students confidence, makes them feel safer. It validates their ideas. So before asking your students to share in open class, give them the time to practice to talk in a smaller group. Use cooperative strategies such as think, pair, share, time pair, or round robin, because these strategies are designed with very clear interaction patterns. So everybody knows that they have to participate when they have to participate. So for example, in think, pair, share, well, first I think, and then I have to talk with a partner, and then I share. With time pair, we know how much time each person has to speak. So I have 10 seconds. If we're working with language learners, let's also be realistic about the time. Each person has to talk 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a lot of time to talk. So consider the level of your students and be realistic about how long they are actually going to speak. Very low level, 10 seconds is more than enough. 20 seconds, more than enough. So you talk 20 seconds, I talk 20 seconds. You talk 10 seconds, I talk 10 seconds. Round robin, each one has to say an idea and we take turns. You first say your idea, then you say your idea. So we know that everybody's going to participate, that everybody's responsible for saying an idea. And again, as I showed you before, scaffold. Don't ask your students to do speaking activities that they don't have the language for, that they don't know how to do. Don't ask them questions that they can't answer because they haven't been given enough support. So if you want them to talk about what they like and they don't like, give them sentence frames, give them vocabulary, give them adjectives, give them nouns, so they have the language they need to be able to participate. And finally, create accountability. Make your students feel that they have to be part of the class, that they have to be part of the process, and that there is some sort of consequence if they are not. And I would consider making this some fun activity, like I would generate a penitence for students who are not paying attention, who are distracted, who don't get to participate. And I would get them to choose a penitence that they all like and that they all agree with. The idea here is not to humiliate anybody or make anybody feel terrible, but it can be something funny. Like, for example, maybe there is a song that they think is funny and that they like to sing, so they have to sing the song in front of the whole class. Or maybe they have to take a funny picture and share it with the class. It's up to them to decide, but it has to be something that everybody agrees. If it's your turn to participate and you are distracted, you're not paying attention, you're not ready, you get the penitence, whichever penitence you decide. So let's say that you don't have breakout rooms, you are working in your class, or maybe you want to do a whole class activity. There are different things that you can do. For example, you can do chain speaking, where you ask a question and nominate a student, and then that student nominates a different student to answer a question. So it forms a chain. Again, as I said, if a student gets nominated and he's not ready to answer, he's distracted, he wasn't paying attention, then he gets a penitence, the penitence that you all agreed on. You can also do this using random name pickers. So it's more interesting, it's more exciting. You can use many different random pickers online, so students have to be on their toes. So you can get students to nominate each other. You can use a random name picker. And if you want everybody to really pay attention to what's going on so they don't get the feeling that, I already participated, so I don't have to listen anymore, you can call on a random student and say, okay, what did she say? Or what did Maria say? So they always have to listen to what everybody else is talking. They don't get to zoom out of the class because they already participated. Also, you can ask students to take notes and then nominate a random student to give a general report. You can tell them, okay, everybody's going to participate, everybody has to take notes. After 5 people have participated, I'm going to nominate somebody to tell me what they said. So if you have a large class, let's say you have 40 students, maybe not everybody is going to be able to participate in the chain speaking, but everybody has to pay attention because they don't know when you might call on them. Another thing you have that you can do if you have a very large class, you can use fishbowl discussions. In a fishbowl discussion, you have a small group that is actively speaking and a larger group who's taking notes and who is writing possible questions to ask. So for example, if you can have 2 or 3 people in the center talking about their favorite movie and the rest of the class is quiet, but they are taking notes, they are asking possible questions, they are writing comments, I agree, I disagree, I like this comment. So when this, or you can also ask them to give feedback. You can ask them, for example, if you're talking about films, you can ask them to make notes on language use. Are they using the correct words to talk about plot, story, characters, etc.? So they can use notes and give feedback using a rubric. They can share their opinions. They can write questions. And finally, you can use, and this is for higher level students, you can use spider web discussions. And on a spider web discussion, there are 3 very clear rules. First, the students must be able to see each other. So this is one activity where you want all the cameras on. Second, the teacher must stay silent. So at no point in the discussion, you are allowed to participate. You are just a note taker. And finally, you have a clear rubric where students self-assess and choose a group grade. So everybody is going to get the same grade. So how does this work? Your students get a topic, a questions, and they have to generate a discussion led by themselves. The teacher is not going to let's say, interact or lead the discussion. It's totally student directed. And the role of the teacher is to create a diagram similar to what you're seeing here, where he marks the different interactions, who's talking, who's answering, who commented. So when the discussion is over, students are going to be able to see participation, who participated, how the participation went from one to another, who supported ideas, who sent the discussion into a new direction, and then they can see how their discussion was productive, how their participation was productive, how they were able to communicate. This, as I said, is for higher levels. You can scaffold for the topic, but the idea is for students to be able to have a normal class discussion with real communication. So I don't know if you have any questions. I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see you. Hold on, I don't know how to stop sharing. Huh. So how do I stop sharing? Maybe Skype? No. Okay, okay. Great, so, I don't know if you have any questions.
Please make your questions with the chat. Right. No questions? So, okay, so that means that it was really clear. All right. Okay. Yes. Yeah, they are saying.
Miss, good morning.
Good morning.
The other skill for work the group in groups, the speaking. Other skill for speaking in group.
What do you mean other skill? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
Techniques or skills for speaking in groups.
He's asking to develop their speaking skill. Yes, different from the ones you have just presented.
Other techniques, well, it depends on the level of your students. I would say the most important thing is to give them plenty of opportunities independently of what kind of lesson. If it is a reading lesson, they still need to have opportunities to speak. So you can get them to have short conversations about their opinions, about their ideas. But speaking, and always scaffold. Don't ask your students to, okay, now, what do you think about, I don't know, what do you think about food? And how are they supposed to express their ideas if you don't give them a clear structure? So you can tell them, okay, let's talk about favorite food and least favorite food. So they have something. You can say, my favorite food is, and my least favorite food is, so they have language to use. But if you just give them an open topic, like let's talk about food, they won't be able to do it because they don't have the language to do it. So that's why we have to scaffold. We have to give them sentence frames. We have to give them, if we're going to ask them to talk about food, are we sure they know vocabulary? We can give them words to talk about fruits, words to talk about vegetables, words to talk about fast food. But we need to make sure that they have the language to be able to produce. I don't know if that answers your question, Miss Marcia.
I would like, Lori, I would like to ask you, according to your experience in in this kind of remote teaching process, for example, what is better? What is better to have? Because here in Peru we have two kind of we can make a class for 1 hour, or for example here at the Language Center we have 2 hours for classes, right? What is the ideal time to make a significant class, please? 1 hour, 2 hours, depending on maybe the theme or the topic of the class.
I think we have to be aware that working online is very exhausting. So if we're going to do a 2-hour class, we need a variety of activities so that students don't feel, you know, like overwhelmed. And I would consider giving them a short break in the middle. So I think shorter might be better because the Zoom effect is real. Zoom is an exhausting activity. But if we have a schedule where our students have to have 2-hour classes, I would consider having a class with varied activities so our students can have mental breaks. So I would, and always, if you have enough time, if you have a class that is 2 hours long, start your class checking in with your students because you have enough time. So how are you? How do you feel? What's new? Give them a time to interact and to create connections so they feel part of a group. I think 2 hours is not terribly long, but it needs to be a very well-prepared class that considers many different kinds of interaction. It shouldn't be a class where students are just sitting there listening to somebody talking. So I would start with a speaking activity, then we can do a listening, go back to the breakout rooms, have a conversation, come back, let's play an interactive game. So maybe not so much worry about the time of the class, but making sure that the time doesn't feel extremely long.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lori. We have now other questions. Okay, Katia is asking if Macmillan have any new material to work, virtual classes. Maybe you can give us an additional page to get more variety of...
Yes, absolutely. Macmillan, and let me see if I can share the link with you guys. Macmillan has right now made a lot of changes in our materials to adapt to this special situation. So now we have fully flexible courses. That means that you have the option to decide what's going to work better for you. Would it be better to have a physical book? It would be better to have a digital book. Is it better to have an online workbook? So the materials are going to adapt to your needs. And I'm going to share the link for our page on the chat box. And here, let me see. Hold on. Okay, here we go. This is, here, okay, here. So this is our page. This is macmillanenglish.com. And here you can have our all-inclusive back-to-school offer. And I'm going to send you that as well so you can have it. Oh, it's a pleasure. And as I said, so what it means when we say all-inclusive back to school is that the materials are going to adapt to your needs, that the materials are fully flexible, so they adapt to, if you're in the physical classroom, excellent. If you're in the online classroom, excellent. The materials are going to adapt to exactly what you need.
Okay, here we have some more questions, but they are similar to the ones we have asked before. For example, they say what other techniques recommended for good communication and interaction in classes. Maybe you have one that is really, really, really good for you and you can share with us.
I think the main way to get your students to interact in class is first to have very clear rules, what is expected. For example, if you're doing, as I mentioned, the chain speaking where everybody gets to participate, they need to know. I have heard some teachers that tell me, no, students need to have the camera on because otherwise they don't pay attention. Well, camera on, camera off, if they don't know that they have to participate, they're going to get distracted. So I would have activities such as that, like chain speaking, where you nominate the students or they nominate each other so they know that they have to participate. But especially, I would make sure that they have time to prepare before they have to participate. Many times we ask questions and expect our students to answer, and we didn't give them time or we didn't give them the scaffold to participate. So for example, you ask them, what is the pass of go? Well, maybe they don't know. How about go out to the breakout rooms, brainstorm. Let's use Kagan structures. So each one has to say a verb in past and make a list. So I say when, you say ate. I say felt, you said whatever. Now that you have a list, come back into the main classroom and we are going to do a chain speaking where everybody has to say a sentence in past. They are prepared to participate because they already had a previous practice. So I would consider scaffolding and preparation, and making sure that students know that they have to participate. And that's why I like the idea of the penitence, because there has to be some consequence, but the consequence shouldn't be grades. Because grades are extrinsic motivation, and it can be very frustrating. So it's better to have something that is fun. You can use gamification as well. You can create, for example, you can create a leaderboard. And when every student reaches so many points, you have a class reward. So if we're doing participation, and I want all my students to talk about their day yesterday using the past. So I'm going to start giving points. When the class reaches, not each student, the class, when the class reaches, I don't know, 100 points, 20 points, 40 points, we get a reward. So the same way we agree to a penitence, we agree to a reward. The reward could be anything. It could be they choose a song, they choose a game, they choose, they have 2 minutes of chat where they just talk about whatever they want in whatever language they want. It doesn't matter. So find ways to get your students constantly active and constantly motivated.
Oh, thanks a lot. There is one more. And well, can you give us some strategies to improve writing? You know that writing is one of the most difficult because maybe most of them don't like to write now, or they're afraid to make a mistake because they know that it's going to be a score to be done, right? And also for us, the teachers, you know that checking and writing, so it takes a
long time.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, you can give us one of your secrets for that.
Yes, I think one of the problems with writing is that it feels that it doesn't apply to real life. Like, when do we write? I never write. I don't need to write. No, you do write all the time. Younger students, like teenagers and younger generations, they spend a lot of time writing Instagram posts and writing comments to Instagram. So first of all, I think we need to make sure that they understand that that is something that they already know how to do. And I would start small. I think it's a mistake to start, even with older students, we sometimes want them to start right ahead writing a paragraph. The thing is that maybe they don't know how to write a paragraph, not even in Spanish. So let's start with what they already know and build from there. Let's write a sentence. Let's get the specifics right first. So let's write a simple sentence. So they notice that in English, you need a subject. Sometimes the students write the sentences without a subject because in Spanish, we don't use subjects. We use sujeto tácito. So let's start with a sentence. Now let's move on to a compound sentence connected with a conjunction. Now let's move on to a paragraph with only simple compound sentences. And as I said before, let's be very clear about what we are correcting. When we tell our students to write a paragraph and we start marking the whole paper and the student only looks at the paper and they see circles and circles and circles, the whole thing is wrong. That's very frustrating, and it's very difficult to correct a paragraph that is completely wrong. But what about if we tell them to write a paragraph and pay attention? Only we're going to correct this first time, we're only going to correct use of, as I said before, for example, run-on sentences. We're going to make sure that all the sentences are correctly connected. Excellent, we covered that. Now, let's rewrite the paragraph, and this time we're going to look at subject-verb agreement. Only that, nothing else. We're just going to focus on subject-verb so they feel progress. I already know how to do sentence connections. Now I know how to do subject-verb agreement. But if we correct everything that is wrong in the paragraph, and it's a paragraph that turns out to be completely marked over, that's very overwhelming. That's very hard to, and that's the other thing. Sometimes we do writing activities, we give them back to the student. The student looks at the paper. Oh, wow, this was great. Oh, this was awful. And the next thing they do is throw the paper over their shoulder. It's done. It's finished. Writing is about rewriting. You write and you rewrite and you rewrite and you rewrite. When you take writing classes, there's never just one draft. There's the first draft, the second draft, the third draft, and finally the final draft. So let's create that culture of drafting. You did the first draft. These are the mistakes in this specific area. Correct those mistakes for the second draft. Okay, for the second draft, we're going to look at these specific mistakes, correct those. Let's go to the third draft. But don't ask your students to write many different paragraphs and the mistakes never get corrected, because then there's no process.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, as I see, I don't have any more questions about it. Yes, they are saying thank you too. Okay, so Lori, thanks a lot. We as teachers need to learn how to use the material online so we can develop our language, our students' language skill. Thanks a lot for your participation. And also,
thank you so much.
Thanks Macmillan, Education Peru, for the support they have given us to this event. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
It was our pleasure too. Okay, un mensaje para todos los participantes, por favor, aquellos que no han marcado su asistencia en la primera vez o en la segunda vez, por favor, pueden hacerlo solamente haciendo clic en el link. Nada más, eso es necesario. Si ya lo han hecho, obviamente que les va a salir una respuesta de que ya lo hicieron. Ok, en cuanto a la entrega de certificados, se hará a partir del 14 de octubre para los participantes de la ciudad de Cajamarca. Para los participantes de otras ciudades se enviarán escaneados a los correos que ustedes nos han enviado. Okay, and we were really congratulated for your participation in this event. Thank you very much to all of you. See you next time.